You're listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast, a podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. And welcome back to the Renegade Blitz podcast. I'm Polk, joined by Chris Ward, back to talk to you Steelers versus Browns, the regular season finale. And Chris, there's been a lot of big news this week for the Steelers. TJ Watt, for the second year in a row, was named the team MVP for the Steelers.
Yeah, it was pretty much a no-brainer there. The kind of year Watt's having, really should win Defensive Player of the Year. And he's just been consistent and really the best player on the Steelers all year, obviously. At one point, I thought Roethlisberger might have won it, but he kind of, the last couple games, he hasn't been playing too well. Up until, his heroic second-half performance against the Colts.
Yeah, he's the first player to win back-to-back team MVP awards since James Harrison, and if he were playing in this game on Sunday, he would be going after James Harrison's sack records. But as we learned from Gary Dulac of the Post-Gazette, we've learned that TJ Watt and other players from the Steelers will not be playing in the season finale.
Along with Roethlisberger, Pouncey, Hayward have reportedly been ruled out as well.
So you have to wonder who else could potentially be ruled out. As it stands right now, none of the receivers have been ruled out, but with Deontay Johnson coming up a little gimpy on that punt return last week against the Colts, you have to wonder if he's going to be a late scratch, because the Steelers certainly have enough weapons in the receiver room to afford to give him a day off, maybe another if they want to, if they go into the practice squad. Deion Kane is still available, so there's a lot of options that the Steelers have for this game.
Yeah, they could limit snaps for a lot of guys. Dulac mentioned that DeCastro and Hayden will probably have their snaps limited. I mean, you have to, put out a roster of, guys to play, like 48 players out there on the field. But hopefully Tomlin, puts as many player reserves as he can. Call as many players that you need from the practice squad if possible. Right now, Edmonds didn't practice the last 2 days with a shoulder injury, and Boswell yesterday didn't practice. He's dealing with that groin injury still, so that's something to watch for.
All right, and that's the Steelers injury report, and now we'll talk to our next guest. And a little bit of an editor's note here. We originally had Tom Wivers, AP reporter out in Cleveland, to talk to for the Browns game this week, but he was unable with everything going on in the Browns with their situations due to COVID. And we're glad to welcome back Jake Burns, film analyst and writer at the Orange and Brown Report. Jake, it's great to have you back on.
My pleasure, guys. Excited to chat about a game that's got some huge implications for Cleveland, but also potentially some huge ones for who Pittsburgh matches up with in the first round.
Absolutely. There's a possibility that we could meet again next week, and the week after, rather. So it's always interesting to see if the Browns can make it back in for the first time since 2002.
Well, listen, it was the last time they made it. They took a trip over to Pittsburgh for a game that not many people in Cleveland forget, as they thought they had it won and lost it. You guys have had infinite number of playoff games since then. It's unfortunately stuck in the crawl of Cleveland Browns fans' heads. So, yeah, it would be some sort of little poetic thing for the Browns if they do make it to make another trip over to Heinz Field. That'd be cool.
Man, how quickly this thing's changed in the NFL. A week ago, it seemed like the door was wide open for the Browns to take the AFC North crown for the first time ever and the first division championship since 1989. Now they have to fight to keep themselves in the playoff picture, and just at the worst time ever, a COVID-19 issue is running through the Browns locker room. But how have fans been feeling about this entire moment? I know for you, seeing you on Twitter, it hasn't exactly been the best for you guys right now.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Cleveland's fan base is always in Murphy's Law mode, man. Like, it's just until things kind of shake out otherwise, people are always going to presume the worst is going to happen. So, you might have been 10-4 entering this last week, but people don't really understand, there's more people looking at what can go wrong than what can go right. So yeah, while the door was kind of cracked open with Pittsburgh and obviously up until really the late third quarter there, you guys would say things kind of started to turn around against the Colts. It's just like people were more happy about the idea that Pittsburgh could beat the Colts and that we could get in the playoffs because, for a couple weeks now, there have been all these scenarios where you look at Baltimore's schedule, you look at the Colts schedule, you look at the Titans, and you look at Pittsburgh, and you're like, there's a way in which there could be multiple teams here, and the Dolphins too, where there's 11-5, and everybody goes 11-5, and the Browns get shut out of the playoffs. So there's this element of this, the worst is going to happen. So, we obviously had a great opportunity, the Browns did, to lock themselves into the playoffs, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit, what went wrong with the Jets game. But yeah, there is a certain level of tension between Browns fans and where this team's going, just because we've seen it. Let me put it this way. The Browns haven't been in this position in a long time, but there is always going to be only in Cleveland can things go this kind of wrong sort of deal. So there's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of pessimism until if they can beat Pittsburgh this weekend. People will still be as negative as they can possibly be until they see it come to fruition.
It's been bad timing for the Browns. As Baker Mayfield had to play without his main wide receivers due to the them being on the COVID-19 reserve list. The list has grown in the last 24 hours. At the time of this interview, 9 players are on the list, and it's gone into the coaching staff and practice squad. The Steelers are no strangers to postponements due to these issues. Is there any word if the game would be moved? I mean, I know that I saw Pro Football Talk said that the NFL is going to do everything they can to get this game played, especially with the playoffs coming up. Like, they don't have that bye week, or it doesn't really seem realistic that they'll have a week 18 either.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen. I mean, the issue is, and this is something that people have been complaining about unnecessarily from the end that I pay attention to here in Cleveland, is, well, Baltimore got their game moved. They give preferential treatment to different franchises, blah, blah, blah. Well, Baltimore had an outbreak of positives, not just an outbreak of people with close contact. They had an outbreak of positives. And when that's happening, they're going to do everything they can to not forfeit games, move games around, and make it happen. They did the same with Tennessee, so it's not like it was just Baltimore. Like, if the positives are there, they're going to do whatever they can do to keep the football game from infesting in a situation where the positives could be transferred from one team to the next. So, listen, the precedent's unfair, because you would sit here and you would say, well, the normal thing to do is if a team's running through an issue with a high volume of positives, they forfeit. Simple enough. Well, they're not doing that. They're not setting that precedent. So if you run into a situation like Cleveland does with, their wide receiver situation last weekend, or, say Denver did with their quarterback situation, if you have close contacts, they're just going to say those guys are out. And it doesn't matter when it happens. So B.J. Goodson, their Mike linebacker, who's a very important player who won't be playing Sunday, tests positive. They contact trace everybody. They trace these guys, spend a lot of time in the hot tub. The rehab pool is sitting in there together. Those guys are close contacts. Sorry, man, you're out of luck. Those guys are out. So that's the way it goes. Now, they've had another positive test this week with Anderson Dejo, who's a safety who's had a very uneven, more on the downside of things than on the upside of things this year. So they're going to miss Dejo, and they're going to miss B.J. Goodson, but everybody on the list, including those 4 wide receivers, Jarvis Landry, Rashard Higgins, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Kadero Hodge, all guys who have been, Cleveland's starting 4 wide receivers outside of Odell Beckham, those guys will be on track to be back. The people that were close contacts, Carl Joseph, Harrison Bryant, will also be on track to be back. So it sounds worse than what it is. And this is the thing that's frustrating, is the NFL, and maybe Cleveland, I've paid attention to other franchises so much, but when they make these announcements, they're not saying this guy tests positive. They're just putting them on the COVID reserve list, so you don't know how many guys are actually testing positive. And that's frustrating, because you're like, are they out? Are they not out? How many days do they have to sit? What we do know is this, guys. You're not going to have Sendejo. You're not going to have Goodson. And that's the 2 we know are out. Everybody else is on track to be back off the list by Sunday morning, so it'll be active for everybody else as we know today. Listen, as we're talking, craziness could ensue. I don't know, but as of now, we just know those 2 guys are out. They will not move a game if there are only 2, 3, 4. But if it gets into the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 positive tests, not close contact, positive tests, that's when they would move it. So everything is very, very much on track to be back. And listen, the Browns ran into that situation in New York. It sucks. It's just unfortunate. And if you look at the fundamental part of the rule here, probably not fair, guys, but it is what it is. And you just have to shrug your shoulders, and this is the year it is. It could have happened to Cleveland, could have happened to the Jets, could happen to Denver as it did, could happen to anybody. But this is what it is. So you got to do your best to make the most of it. You can't make excuses, and you put your best foot forward, and that's what they're going to have to do this weekend. Obviously, Pittsburgh is going to rest some people. We know of a person they're going to rest. They'll probably rest a few others. But Cleveland will be without some people that are important too. So we'll keep an eye on that if anything changes and becomes even more dire later in the week.
So just for the record, to make sure I get this right, all four of those receivers, Higgins, Peoples-Jones, Landry, and Hodge, are coming back in for this game at this moment.
Yeah, they'll be on track Thursday to come off the list. They have 5 days. So Saturday before the plane. This is what's crazy, guys. They're an hour away from getting on the plane, and they get a positive test notification that they confirm. And then they get the contract chasing. They had to delay the flight to get to New York Saturday night. And it was crazy, man. It was crazy. Under 24 hours. They had no time to plan for this whole thing. And, yeah, those guys go on Saturday. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday into Thursday is the 5 days. And they'll be off at that point. So, yeah, all of those guys will be back. And even, like I said, the other two, Carl Joseph, who came up yesterday, Harrison Bryant, who was also placed on the COVID list the same time Sendejo was, those guys are set to be back Sunday. So anybody from now on, if you hear of any other news from now on, like there's a practice squad player, a person on staff, they will not be allowed to be at the game Sunday.
Well, out of those four, Hodge seems like a new guy, but who would you think out of those four would be perhaps the best performer, or at least the guy that's most likely to break out against his secondary? We don't know. I think that Hayden is not going to play in this game, if I'm correct, Chris.
Only Ben's been ruled out yet by Tomlin, but you kind of can imagine that Tomlin will rest some of his veteran players, like you mentioned, like Hayden, Cam Hayward, Marquise Pouncey, guys like that. No official word, though, yet.
Yeah, I would say, listen, the Browns have played – they're definitely – I mean, when Odell Beckham went out, you guys didn't see that. You were on the tail end of Odell's season here. The first game, I think it was the next week he left after the second play or the first play offensively. They've had a really nice run with Rashard Higgins, who's bounced back, become the guy that we thought he could be. We know Jarvis Landry's a pretty good football player. Those are their 1 and 2. Those are the guys they play a ton. They play, their 12 personnel, or if they're playing their 21 personnel, they play those two wide receivers all the time. Kadarius Hodge has been on and off injured issue list this year with hamstring issues, and was on COVID-19 list himself for a little bit. He's just a solid third, fourth receiver type. He's just consistently catches a football. Nothing to write home about. Same with Donovan Peoples-Jones. They're kind of just Jags, is what I call them. They're just guys, but they're solid. They they run block really well, and in this offense, you have to run block well, and they get where they're supposed to be, and they help Baker Mayfield out, and there's timing there. So those four guys are all very important, but the top two, obviously, between Rashard Higgins and Jarvis Landry, will see the bulk of snaps. Last week, the Browns ran 81 offensive snaps, 77 for Marvin Hall, who filled in last week, a guy they claimed off waivers 3 weeks ago. They played him 77 snaps, and 74 snaps to Jamarcus Bradley, who is another guy who's off the practice squad. He is a rookie, undrafted guy off the practice squad. So they'll play two wide receivers often. So getting those two guys back from Mayfield will be vastly an upgrade, and obviously very important to how Baker feels comfortable and how Kevin Stefanski feels comfortable calling this offense too.
The Browns are ranked 16th in total offense, and it's powered by their fourth-ranked rushing attack with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, who missed the first contest in Week 6. Since he's returned in Week 10, Chubb has averaged 89 yards per game in the 7 contests since he returned. Good enough for 7th in the league, with Hunt at 17th as the secondary ball carrier. And Chubb has 11 touchdowns on the season, rushing touchdowns, and he's like the main bell cow, is what Mike Tomlin likes to say when he refers to James Conner there in Cleveland. He seems like he carries that offense when they get to the run game and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think Nick played the first time Cleveland came to Pittsburgh. He was sidelined with his knee issue at that time, and he's a game changer for them. He's every bit as good as I think any running back in the NFL. Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry, I think, are right there with him. I think those guys would obviously argue for their guy the same way Cleveland fans argue for Nick. He's extremely talented in zone schemes. He's got a great feel for cutback vision, bounce vision, whatever the 3 cuts he wants to make in zone, and he's obviously downhill, fast, physical. He's good. He's very good, and he's a big part of their comfortability, what they want to do. And getting back, I mean, we haven't really talked either about they're missing some offensive line pieces that they're set to get back to. I'm sure you'll get to that question, but yeah, Nick's crazy important to what they want to do. He's the guy they want to get 20 to 25 touches a game in the run game, get him a couple screens and space, very fast guy. And obviously Kareem's a change of pace back. Kareem is less patience. He's more go all the time. He's better for gap schemes, downhill schemes, good in space, wide receiver. Obviously, they like to get him and put their running backs out in space, motion them out of the backfield, motion them back into the backfield. They like doing a wide variety of things with those guys, and Kareem's important. He can catch football from slot location. He can take a screen 25, 30 yards downfield. He's just good. You won't find a better backup running back in the NFL, and I don't even consider Kareem a backup running back. He's just he's the 12th offensive starter in my opinion. Very good football player. They'll find ways to get him the football too, and it's nice. The Browns, when they're really rolling, they have a nice 1-2 punch back there that they can get both those guys going, keeping both their legs fresh. And really, for the most part, they should be pretty fresh down the stretch here. I mean, they didn't really run much against New York because the situation kind of dictated that they didn't run the football much because they fell behind kind of early. But yeah, those two, they're going to present Pittsburgh, whether their starters or reserves are playing a majority of the defensive snaps. They're going to present a tough challenge, and Pittsburgh presents Cleveland with a tough challenge schematically. So I think it's going to be fun to see if Cleveland has Wyatt Teller, their right guard, who's a phenomenal right guard. If he's back playing this week and Nick's back playing too, it'll be a little bit different, a different offensive look for Cleveland than they presented week 6 when they came to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about that because looking at the stat sheet for the Browns especially, and me and you talked about Chubb on Twitter, the two registered 15 carries total on 39 yards rushing last week. Nick had 11 and Kareem had 4. It's very shocking. I know they were behind, but still Cleveland and Baker was doing much better in terms of protecting the football. But did Stefanski talk about a recommitment to the run this week? Because that just seemed absolutely off with what I've known about Cleveland Browns since I've been born and since they've returned.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. It was startling for everybody. And the big topic of discussion this week is did they abandon the running game too quickly and what happened? And because we really haven't seen anything like this. I think the lowest rushing total before Sunday was like 52 rushing yards that they had. I think they ran for 82 one week. It's by far the lowest that they've had single game wise. So, what the Jets did is they knew Cleveland was without their 4 starting receivers. They knew they were going to play 2 wide receivers quite often who didn't really have a great feel for what they'd want to do, adjust on the fly. So I wrote about this. If any of your listeners are interested in understanding what the Jets did, it's pinned at the top of my Twitter page. They essentially said anytime Cleveland's under center, we are just going to run blitz our corners. They would send them inside right now. They would handle any contain, any bounce. They were in charge of all D-gap fits, and they were crashing defensive ends, and they were playing inside. And it gave Cleveland fits. They were stacking. It didn't line up with 8 men in the box, but it got to the point that they were playing 8 men in the box, playing a single Mike linebacker in deep middle like Tampa 2 traditional stuff, and playing the safeties over top. So what they'd send those corners inside, roll the safeties down over the top of the receivers and say, hey, man, we know you want to run the football this week. We know you don't want to have to throw it to these guys very often. So we're just going to challenge you at the point of attack. And I think Cleveland had 6 rushes for 1 yard in the first quarter because they were just overloaded. All the gaps were filled, and there was no cutback to be had. There was no bounce to be had because they just stole gaps. Is essentially what defensive coordinators call it is stealing a gap with a blitz. And that's what they did. Gave Cleveland fits. They did not have any quick checks in with these new wide receivers. They didn't have anything off play action they felt comfortable with these guys. And it was a ballsy plan by the Jets, and it worked. And it really worked. And, if Cleveland doesn't give up 2 quick touchdowns, they probably end up running the football more in neutral situations. But they said, hey, man, this stuff isn't working in the first half. They decided to get to a little bit more shotgun-based run game because then you can't send corners in right away. And I think they ran for 35 yards in the second half. But again, they opened the second half. The Jets scored a touchdown. It was 20-3. Every time you hand the football off when it's 20-3, it's a win for the defense. So the game manipulated itself to turn into that kind of situation. But the Jets, they brought it, man. They brought it in a unique way, a way that I don't think when Cleveland has their wide receivers that teams are ever going to feel comfortable doing all the time. I don't think it's going to be a normal thing, but it is a thing where teams can be like, hey, man, we know this is a run tendency for them. Let's send these guys and give them fits. So it's something to pay attention to. And like I said, if your viewers want to understand it, I tried to break it down pretty easily. I broke down all 9 running plays they had in the first 3 quarters and put it up there. So feel free to check that out.
Yeah, one thing that has helped the Browns this year is Mayfield hasn't turned the ball over often. He's made plays when possible. He had 6 interceptions after the first matchup against the Steelers, in which he threw 2 interceptions in that game, and one of those was a pick 6 by Micah Fitzpatrick. I remember you broke that play down on your film review. In the 9 games since, he's only thrown 2 more interceptions. How has Mayfield's approach changed, and what could we see from him in the final regular season game against the Steelers?
Yeah, he's certainly taking care of the football really well, which is sorry, dogs are barking here, which is vitally important. You got to take care of the football, and I think Kevin Stefanski's done a nice job since the bye week when Cleveland kind of got to slow down, settle down, figure everything out, that they said, hey, we feel pretty comfortable with what these schemes are. These schemes are asking us to do, and I think from that point they've done a really good job finding what Mayfield's comfortable with, and he's been great. He's just been better. Like sometimes there's no magical answer, just a guy is better. And I think he's just been better finding where he needs to go with the football, where his eyes need to be off the first or second read. And he's playing much more consistently good in the pocket rhythmic football. And I think that's very important. Fundamentally sound with his eyes, sound with his mechanics. And I think that's been great. He had a little bit of a step back last week. I think he held on to the football a couple times that he should not have held on to it just a little bit too long. I think he tried to create plays where he felt like his team was unable to run the football. They're unable to really shake guys loose the way they wanted to. He's got guys he wasn't comfortable throwing the football to and tried to make some hero plays happen, caused a couple fumbles, and really a really weird, unfortunate quarterback sneak fumble in there too, which is it's just the second time he's had that happen, which is quite bizarre. But just has to he's talked about it. He can't have those fumbles. He's not had an issue with that in his career, fumbling from the pocket. So but you can't hold on to the football forever in this league. Eventually guys get home.
If I remember correctly from that Micah Fitzpatrick pick 6, was that like a cover 1 robber? And I think you said on the review that like it was a pretty basic read that you're surprised that he missed that.
Yeah, it was a double slant flat, and all they did was for the most part walk down cover 1 man match, and then Minka just read his eyes, right? He thought Minka was jumping. I don't even know if he ever saw Minka, to be honest with you. I think he saw a hole. He thought he had a guy on a slant, that number 2 on a slant. Minka just jumped in front of it. You won't find an easier rob play for a safety to just walk down, play middle. They call it MOF, just play middle of field and kind of use your eyes, go with the quarterback and read it. And, he probably could have walked out there and handed it to 39 at that point. But, yeah, it was just a really bad read. And quarterbacks have that every now and again, man. They just miss them. They don't see them. And especially shorter quarterbacks are always kind of what I call window hunting. If you don't see that safety before you go hunting for a window to throw it into, man, that safety could sometimes be walking down into that window because his eyes are following your eyes at the end of the day, because that's what safeties are taught to do, especially when they're in rob or lurk coverage. And he just caught him on one there. So yeah, I know that was a really crushing one because Cleveland's not a team, and I still believe this. They're really not great at playing from behind. If you can get out in front of Cleveland and play from out in front of them, they're not good at it quite yet. I don't think they have enough trust in their shotgun downfield 3, 5, 7-step passing game to feel great about that yet. So it is something that was unfortunate. And then, they fell behind even more on it. I think Denzel got beat on a double move, and I think Baker threw another, just a ridiculous throw on the right sideline, scrambling through another interception. But yeah, that's something that he cannot make a habit of, especially against defenses like Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Miami, Buffalo, these defenses that are playing really good at the end of the year. He can't hand them the football. He knows that.
And with the Browns focusing on a rushing attack, it protects Mayfield a little bit, and even whenever he throws, they tend to do a really good job with him. They're 5th in sacks allowed with 22 on the season. The Steelers' pass rush sacked him 4 times in Week 6. How do you see the Browns' pass blocking performing against the Steelers' pass rush? And, of course, with the Steelers' decision to maybe rest guys, T.J. Watt is going after the Steelers' sack record held by James Harrison. So there's all types of variables with it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you hit on there, Tyler, is that they it depends on who Pittsburgh plays. Like if they play Cam Hayward, he gives them fits. He's given them fits for years. He's given Joel Bitonio fits. They've had to play a right guard named Nick Harris, who's a rookie, an undersized rookie, to play guard. the last 2 weeks because they lost Chris Hubbard, who you all know very well from his Pittsburgh days. Chris down with a knee injury. They've had to play him. So if Wyatt Teller doesn't play and they have to play a backup right guard, whoever that might be at this point, might be Evan Brown, because I don't know, they're running low on some bodies at that position. But Teller is on track to play, but he hasn't played. He's got an ankle. We don't know if he does play. I think Cleveland will handle pressure pretty well. As long as, TJ thrives, as any pass rusher does, on predictable pass situations, man. When you know that teams are going to be throwing the football and you can pin your ears back and he's a burner off the edge and can use that burning edge speed to kind of get his arm up under you, long arm you, and throw you out of the way. Like, you have to neutralize them. You have to do the best you can to keep the game within 7 points, keep the run pass as a prevalent threat that is able to keep some of these really ridiculously. Miles is the same way. Keep those guys from upfield quick guys and give your tackles a chance. You got to chip them. You got to put it back to their side. Got to put a tight end in a 3-point stance to their side or in a wing and chip them initially to slow them down. That's what's going to be important. I don't think Jack Conklin's going to be winning a majority of the battles with TJ Watt. I just don't think that's going to happen. The same way I'm sure you guys don't feel great about. I'm not sure if Alejandro Still, your left tackle, or whoever's playing left tackle at this point, or how they handle Miles. You just don't feel great about a one-on-one for 75 snaps a game. You need help. So listen, if Pittsburgh's playing their full defensive line, I know Bud's out. And I think Highsmith's playing that opposite role, right? I think he's playing some decent football too. It should be a challenge, even if they don't roll with, Cam doesn't play or whoever doesn't play interior wise. It's still going to be a challenge. I mean, Pittsburgh is bred to get after the quarterback. It's just the DNA. And Cleveland will have to do all they can. And I think they'll do the best they can with play action. I think they'll try to get the football out quick, try to do some quick screen stuff to wide receivers. Also try to get their backs involved in screen stuff too. I know the first game, I think they threw 3 tight end screens, maybe more. I think they think that's a big part of what they want to do against Pittsburgh is try to slow down the edge. So keep your eye on that. I think they'll try to do everything they can. I've said this, and I'll keep saying it's a whatever it takes game for Cleveland. You got to bring trick plays, whatever things you think are going to work. I don't care who lines up the 11 on the Pittsburgh side of the football. Both sides, whatever you think is going to work, you can't hold anything back in your bag, man. You got to empty the clip, right? That's the saying. This is a whatever it takes game for Cleveland. Pittsburgh can hold back. They can keep some things in their pocket. They can keep some tendencies in their back pocket because they know they might line up with Cleveland week 18. We'll see. But for Cleveland, man, it's do what you got to do. If you got to slow down TJ with 2 people to his side continually, do it. If you got to give Wyatt Teller some help, if Cam Hayward plays and you got to give him help inside, do it. Whatever it takes. And I think they'll do that. I think they'll do a ton of different they've been a 13 personnel team getting 3 tight ends involved using multiple pass protection guys in there. I think they'll do whatever. They know Baker is best when he's not pressured. It's the same for any quarterback, really. It's not rocket science, guys, but Baker is a much better quarterback when he's not pressured. And I think that they know that they have to keep him clean, and they'll do 7-man protections, 8-man protections, whatever they think they need to do to keep him clean. And they have faith. They've run 2-man routes often, man. Not a ton of teams do that. Tennessee does a little bit of it, but they run 2-man routes where they'll have 2 wide receivers out or a tight end and a wide receiver out on the same side, and they'll say, hey, we're just going to protect the quarterback, and Baker can make a throw. We trust him to. So I would expect some of that stuff too, and they know they have to limit turnovers, and a big part of limiting turnovers is keeping pockets clean for Mayfield.
What has made Wyatt Teller so good this year? I think at one time he might still be Pro Football Focus had them as their number 1, I think guard, or was it right guard? But what's made him so impressive this year?
Very physical, very athletic, great run game blocker. He can pull in space, runs very well. Great pull guy, great guy on the front side and back side of zone schemes. Great job cutting off backside second level players when he's down the line working wide zone. Really good front side, getting his body positioned to where it needs to get to handle front side gap seal stuff. He's just good. He's physical. He's fast. He has a good firm understanding of what they want him to do, but Callahan's done a great job with him getting his mind right, getting his body where it needs to go. The only thing that slowed him down this year is injuries. He had a calf strain that kept him out 4 weeks in the middle of the season. Then he has this ankle that popped up and came out of the game against Baltimore. He left the game early. He had an ankle issue. So recently engaged, which is good for him. I think he's feeling good, feeling better. Hopefully he's healthy enough to go because he's a key cog for them. I mean, the Browns invest heavily in their offensive line. They really believe in that part of the game. And Wyatt has come on and been a nice surprise for them this year. A guy who's got a great blend, like I said, of size, strength, and attitude. Really, really contagious personality. They like that about him. I think he's a big part of their confidence in the huddle and when they approach any game, knowing that they have 2 dominant guards and 2 tackles they believe in, especially pass protection wise. So listen, you can put a value cap on any offensive guard. I mean, you can kind of call them interchangeable as you want, but he's very good, and I think he's a key part of what they do confidence-wise and comfort in doing different sorts of run schemes on the fly, because they can pull him and pull Bitonio and do just a variance of concepts in the run game that they're a little bit more limited when Chris is in that right guard and when they had to play Nick Harris the last 2 weeks. So he's important for him for sure.
On the Browns defense, obviously it all starts up front with Myles Garrett, who's one of the best pass rushers in the league. Garrett leads the team in sacks with 12, and Vernon has 8 sacks as well this year. Overall, what have you seen from the defensive line this year, and how do you think Garrett matches up against Alejandro Villanueva, who struggled when playing against Carl Lawson, really both times that he played against him this year, but especially Monday night in week 15?
Yeah, Myles has had pretty good success against Alejandro, I think, for the majority of his career. Myles is tough for anybody to handle, man. You got to have the right ability to anchor, and you got to have the right ability to hit your drop point. Because if you're slow out to your drop point, he's going to turn the corner on you, and if you can't anchor, he's just going to use that inside arm and just put it up under your chest plate and drive you back into the quarterback's lap. So, Pittsburgh, if I recall, the first game were very smart about getting a second body in his direction, trying to slow him down. As you guys well know, maybe Browns fans don't know, Pittsburgh's one of the best get the football out of the quarterback's hands as fast as possible teams in the NFL now. I think there's a little bit of we want to see more downfield shots from Pittsburgh recently, and I think they finally found a couple downfield shots there against the Colts. They need to open up that level of the field, but the big part of the first matchup was the ball is out of Ben's hands lightning quick, and that's how you nullify any pass rush, is you get the ball out of the quarterback hands ASAP. So I'm sure they'll continue to try to do that even with Mason. They'll want him to get rid of the football quickly, because I don't think that there's a ton of confidence in Pittsburgh's offensive line lasting 3 seconds back there with solid pass protection. So there's a balance they're trying to find, right? They're trying to find those opportunities where they can get 3-4 man rushes and be able to throw the football downfield, but also keep doing what they do, which is get rid of the football quick and let those wide receivers that are so dangerous in space make plays. So obviously Myles is very good. Olivier Vernon is come on really, really well since mid-season when Myles went out with his COVID positive. He had a 3-sack game against the Eagles. He had a 2-sack game, I think, against Houston. I don't know. It's all blur. But he had a couple sack game there. He's been all over the field for them. He's been their best defensive line run game defender. He's been very strong at the point of attack, sets the edge very well. He's dangerous, man. And if you take him lightly, very, very strong guy. If you try to put tight ends on him too often, he'll take advantage of it. Sheldon Richardson's been their most consistent defensive tackle. Still not been great, but consistently okay. They play Larry Ogunjobi too, who is in his 4th year. He's just kind of is what he is. He's a spark every now and again guy, but won't make a ton of big plays for him. So, if you're going to keep the Browns pass rush in check, you got to keep obviously Myles, and you got to really focus on Olivier Vernon, because he'll be able to do some things opposite this year, to the point where a lot of people thought Olivier was done after this year with Cleveland when his contract expired, but there might be a way that they can both work something out. But they also bring Adrian Claiborne off the bench as their rotational edge, who is an older veteran player. Obviously, I'm sure most people have heard of Adrian from his time with Atlanta. But yeah, he's obviously a sneaky threat that they bring in their rotation as well. So you got to keep an eye on him too. So they go really 3-4 deep in pass rush. But if Pittsburgh continues to try to get the football out quick, that's where they can take advantage of some of Cleveland's defensive back issues. Yeah,
and with Villanueva, my assessment of him always is that he's a pretty good pass blocker, but I never thought he was an outstanding run blocker, and he kind of struggles sometimes against the bull rush, which kind of what Carl Lawson did against him, and beat him inside a couple times a couple weeks ago.
It is a tough game for Pittsburgh too, man. I mean, they were trying to figure out some things on the fly, and I didn't get a chance to watch that Colts game yet. I'm gonna try to watch it in the next 2 days. I saw it up to halftime, and I'm like, man, I don't know how these guys are going to score, but I saw a couple downfield shot plays, and that's what you need to do. Teams keep walking down, getting closer to the line of scrimmage. Eventually, you got to put the ball in the air and let your guys go get it. And I continue to say that the four receivers Pittsburgh has are some of the best in the NFL from a collective group standpoint. So Cleveland will be very conscious of some of those downfield shots. And two, I think Mason's built a little bit more to hang on to the football and try to throw it downfield. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. But I know Pittsburgh doesn't want to change who they are. I know they're happy to get an opportunity to rest some of their guys after that early season change to the bye week. Was it bye week, week 4, week 5, something silly early. And they're happy to get some guys off the field early, but they want to compete. They don't want to just see this as a blow-off game because they know they got to be back ready to go, and it could be the same team week 18. So I'm fascinated to see how it plays out because I think Mason's going to be asked to do things differently than what he was asked to do last year when he struggled.
And of course, the $100 million question is the Garrett Rudolph incident from last year. What do you expect the atmosphere to be like in Cleveland?
I would hope, and I think the quote from Mike Tomlin was so great about it's so far in our rearview mirror at this point, we don't have any idea about that thing anymore. Like, I think Miles has passed it. I hope Mason has passed it. I hope those two can find each other on the football field, shake hands, and get past it together, man, for the public, because it's just coming up more than it should still be coming up. I think these are two dudes who got caught in a really bad situation in terms of, I don't think their character of either guy is the way it was portrayed on national TV. Like, I know Pittsburgh isn't fond of Miles from a collective, but that's not who the dude is. He's a great human being. He does a ton of things in the community. He does overseas, work. He was hugely voluntary and clean water initiative. Like, that's not who. If you have spent any time with Myles Garrett in terms of just watching any video that you see, he's insightful. He's a thoughtful human being. I don't know what was said on the field. The only two people that know what was said on the field were the two dudes who were out there on the field. And maybe somebody's lying. Maybe somebody misunderstood. But we're a year past this, man. So just they need to move past it. I think they have. I think that Mike Tomlin's quote was great. Kevin Stefanski says some great things about it. I think everybody's past it. And I think that there should be a little, bury the hatchet type of thing between. I hope they do. I hope that happens for them. And I hope they both just play football, and this can be a small blip on both dudes' career. But I think if there's any atmospheric stuff, then it's just fans being nonsensical, because the dudes on the field and the people who matter most in this situation, I think, are beyond it. And I hope that it's never really going to be a blip on either of these dudes' radar for the rest of their career.
For the record, I agree. I mean, there's much more important things going on right now. Cleveland's fighting for a playoff spot, and with a lot of the thoughts about the Steelers quarterback-wise, Mason's fighting for a job out there. So yep. I think to begin with, that this is more or less just like a fan Twitter-esque thing more than anything else.
It absolutely is, and that's just the nature of fans and the 24-hour sports news cycle. It's going to come up, but the people that, like, I said this because I've been asked this question before. It's like, Miles has passed it. I'm sure I don't hear quotes from Mason, but I'm sure Mason would say the same things, man. Like, we buried it. It's done. What happened. It's over. Mike Tomlin had, like I said, a great quote about it. He dapped up Miles when they saw each other in week 6. Like, it's over. It's all good. Just like, play football, worry about what's most important. Like you said, Mason's worried about a job. Browns, Miles, they're trying to get to week 18 for the first time in 17 years, man. Like, they're cool with it. Let's just roll and play good football, and hopefully nothing like that ever needs to happen again. I don't think it will, but, hopefully it doesn't.
Tennessee scored 35 points and 431 yards in a 42-31 losing effort to the Browns, and Baltimore scored 47 points and 385 yards and 231 yards on the ground, beat the Browns on that Monday Night Football game a few weeks ago. Where's the weakness on defense? And a lot of people in Cleveland have mentioned that the linebacker and safety play hasn't been up to par this year. Is that what you've seen also?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Cleveland's the worst garbage time football team in the NFL. And I don't mean that as a slight. It just is what it is. Like, they're up 38-7 on Tennessee, and they just don't play prevent. They just don't play box coverage well. Like, they just don't. When they know teams are throwing, they don't cover well. It's just, it is what it is. They've been up big time on multiple teams this year, Dallas included, where teams have come back and put some garbage time points up on the board. So, like, the point differential, the plus minus for Cleveland is, like, negative, I think, still. I don't pay much attention to that. I look at the neutral stats, where if a game is within a conflux of 2 touchdowns, I think it's a touchdown and a half, Cleveland's 40 points better. Listen, what I'm saying is, in neutral situations, they play good football. When they're up heavily, you eliminate heavy situations where the team's either up on them or they're up on somebody else. They're not good. They don't handle it very well. So, yeah, I mean, the safety play's not been great. I don't think the back half of the defense has been as consistent as they hoped. Ronnie Harrison, who is trending toward being back this week, they got him from Jacksonville earlier in the year. He was slow to figure everything out defensively, schematically, got on, started to really put it together, had a great game against the Colts, another great game in there too. I think maybe the Eagles game, but he got hurt in Jacksonville in the first play, had a collarbone or shoulder issue. He's finally back off of the injured reserve list, ready to go for this weekend to give them some consistent play. I mean, Carl Joseph has been in and out of the lineup. Anderson Dejo, who's been their most knowledgeable back half of the defense type of player, but is just not athletic enough to consistently make plays in the NFL, has been a bit of a problem all year. And they've had some issues. Like, if you watch the Jets game, Denzel Ward has a mental breakdown. He had a mental breakdown on the double move there. I think James Washington maybe there. Week 6 got him on a double move. Like, Denzel's very, very good. Like, he's very good. But every now and again, he has an issue. And he came back from a calf injury a couple weeks ago. So hopefully he can get some of those situations ironed out. But they had a couple mental breakdowns that really hurt them. Look, I call this the way it is. The Browns have 8 Jags on defense, man. Just guys that are just average NFL players who, you guys know, you watch, man. Like, some days they make plays, some Sundays they're the issue. Like, it just is week to week dependent. They have Miles show up pretty consistently. Denzel shows up pretty consistently. Olivier Vernon showed up to be pretty consistent the second half of the year, but they got just a bunch of guys, man. Like, that's kind of it. Like, Carl Joseph's a 1-year contract guy. BJ Goodson, who's been a really good Mike for them. He's out this weekend, but he's just a guy. Like, they're going to count on Mac Wilson, who's been a very inconsistent second-year player. They're going to count on Malcolm Smith, who they signed at the linebacker position before the year, who's a veteran. But it's just, he's just, some weeks he's good, some weeks he's bad. That's the situation they're in, man. Like, they don't have a bunch of they don't have Devin. I know Devin's hurt for you guys, but they don't have Devin. They don't have a ton of those guys. They don't have Mink in the secondary at the safety position. They don't have what Cleveland was trying to do was build their offense up this offseason and then draft and find the right secondary pieces in the second offseason. And I think that's where they're trying to get to, is spin their assets on the defensive side of the football next year. So they're susceptible to a lot of things in the secondary, limited athletically in the secondary for the most part, and their linebackers are very inconsistent. So there will be holes to be had in the throwing game. And really, I think I could be wrong here, guys, but I'm pretty sure James Conner went for over 100 the first matchup. So I think that they have to do a much better job of handling James in the running game, because if you let Pittsburgh start to run, they become very dangerous when you have to stop worrying about their quick throwing game and worry about them running the ball from the gun. So I'll be fascinated to see how they're able to bottle him up a little bit more than they did the first time these two played.
Yeah, and for the record, that was the last 100-yard rusher the Steelers had, and it was also the second to last 100-yard rushing effort for the Steelers. The Jacksonville game is the last time they went 100 yards rushing total as a team. And you mentioned a little bit about Denzel Ward. He's highly talented. 2 interceptions, 18 passes defended. You also didn't mention Terrence Mitchell, who has 12 passes defended and 3 forced fumbles. Talk a little bit about the rest of the cornerback play for the Browns.
Yeah, Terrence Mitchell's a guy they brought in 3 years ago he was backing up Greedy Williams last year. Greedy's been out, who they drafted with their first pick in the draft in 2019. They didn't have a first-round pick because you recall they traded for Odell Beckham, but Greedy's been out all year with nerve damage in his shoulder, so Terrence Mitchell's been starting all year. Just solid dude, man. Solid football player. He's not. I hate to refer to him this way, but they're just kind of average guys, and that's okay. You need average guys. They got that. They got a pretty solid play from Terrence Mitchell. Can be beat on double moves. Can sometimes be susceptible to inside breaking routes, but for the most part is where he's supposed to be on the football field type of player. Sure tackler. They play Kevin Johnson in the slot. He was a former first-round pick of the Texans in 2017, I believe. Bounced out of Houston, had a year last year with Buffalo where he was pretty solid. But the problem, he doesn't tackle well in space. Had a couple terrible efforts against the Jets that cost them some first downs that should not have happened. Covers okay, can mirror routes inside okay, but is certainly not a top half of the league nickel corner. And like I said, you play nickel corner, you got to be able. You really have to be able to tackle in the NFL, because sometimes you're running into tight ends, sometimes you're running into bigger physical slot wide receivers. Like he just struggles with that in space. So they'll play him. That'll be the rotation. Terrence will play with Denzel outside. They'll bring sometimes Carl Joseph down towards the box and play him a little bit. And they'll play a guy named Sheldrick Redwine deep, was a 4th-round pick in the 19 draft. Inconsistent second-year player out of Miami. You just hope for the best, man. Fingers crossed when he finds the field, especially with Sendejo out. So they will play Kevin down in the box as the nickel corner, and then they'll roll Ronnie sometimes down there. We'll see how much he plays down there coming off the injured list. But they'll also play Carl Joseph down there as a box support defender and a guy down there who can play some slot coverage every now and again. So that's really that's all they want to do. They were playing a young man named Tavier Thomas down in that direction earlier in the year due to injuries, but he won't see many snaps there for them anymore. So they're lucky and feel really grateful to have Harrison back in this game. We'll see if he's actually active for it, because you never really know how injuries respond late in the week in some situations. But yeah, they feel like with playing Carl and playing Ronnie Harrison, they have a decent group there, and they'll put Kevin Johnson in the slot too.
We'll start at strong safety if Carl Joseph can't play on Sunday due to being on the reserve COVID-19 list.
It'll be Redwine if that doesn't happen. I think they feel good about Carl coming back and being out there. But if worse comes to worse, they will elevate somebody off the practice squad who I think they have elevated. His name is not coming to me. He's not found the field very much. I'm sorry about that, guys. But they'll play. It'll be a majority, if not all the snaps will be to Redwine.
So again, we're doing this on a Wednesday. There's still a lot of things we're trying to figure out with who's going to line up for the Steelers. We probably won't find out until game time. So just as far as you know right now, what is your biggest concern for the Browns in this game? And who do you think can be the guy that pushes them over the top in this game?
Well, they just have to play well. Like they have to be, put it this way, they can't beat themselves. They can't allow, and I'm sure you guys would agree with this, and this is no slight to Pitt, but Mason is not in the ballpark of Ben. He's not very good, and if they let him beat them, then that's their own fault. I just think Mason is, he threw 4 interceptions, I think, that week 16 game or whatever that, it wasn't week 16, it was a little earlier in week 12 maybe last year. He doesn't handle pressure well, one of the worst quarterbacks under pressure in terms of when he was playing last year. They have to get pressure on him. I think Miles and the defensive line have to play one of their best games of the season, take care of business. Offensively, look, if you and I and everybody else looks up at the scoreboard and the Browns have 35 rushing yards in the third quarter, it's probably a really close game. I think that will dictate a lot. Can Cleveland find a way to run the football? And I think they only ran for 82 yards when they visited Pittsburgh week 6. So they have to be able to run the football. It's just a large part of their identity. I think Baker can handle a lot of it. But on his own, but a large part of their identity is, man, we run the rock and we run it well, and it's a part of making defenses question how they're going to defend us. So if they're getting pressure, the way the Browns wins, they get pressure on Mason, they make him uncomfortable, they make him make a couple mistakes, they take advantage of those mistake offerings, and then on the offensive side of the football, they take care of it and they run it. And if they're able to do those two things, take care of the football and run with some success, 125 to 175 yards of running, then they win. I think it's pretty simple in that regard because I don't think Pittsburgh's going to play this game. I know they're saying they're playing it to win it. They want to win. They'll go out there with their helmets strapped up. They're going to try to win. But the biggest goal Mike Tomlin is in his coach's office talking with his dudes is we got to stay healthy. We got to stay healthy. We got to be right going into the playoffs, and I think that's the biggest thing. So they might start TJ. They might start some other guys, but they won't play him the full game. I just think it would be silly, and I think personally, I'm not trying to say that I'm always objective about this whole thing. It'd be silly for Pittsburgh to invest a ton in this game. It just would be. You're on the road, you're trying to stay healthy, and you want to keep your guys right, ready to go, and healthy and fresh for Week 18. Whether you run into Miami or whether you run into Cleveland, it doesn't matter. You got to have your right guys going at the right time. So, they want to win. It'd be cool for Pittsburgh to knock Cleveland out of the playoffs as a rival, AFC North rival. But at the end of the day, if they said to Mike Tomlin, hey, man, you can win this game, knock Cleveland out, but Minka's going to be hurt for next week. What do you do? We'll take Minka. We don't care. That's what they want. They want their dudes to be right. So it's Cleveland. Anything could happen. The Browns could blow this football game 6 ways to Sunday. It could always happen, but I think that the outcome here is that Cleveland probably ends up winning this game some way, somehow.
Yeah, the latest odds that I saw were the Browns were favored by 10 points. So, Mason Rudolph is Mason Rudolph is the starter. Definitely plays a big role in that, and a number of other starters probably won't play much or not at all. So, with that said, do you have a prediction for the game?
Yeah, I think Cleveland wins something like 24-20, 27-20, something like that. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I have a hard time seeing that. I think when Pittsburgh's guys are in the early portions of the game, they're going to be playing extremely hard. I do think that if Cleveland does jump out 14-17 something, Tomlin will yank people, and I think that he'll just call it. I think he'll know that it's smart to call it. So it's probably really important for Cleveland to get out early because then it makes Tomlin's decision pretty easy the rest of the way. Hey man, we're just going to pull guys. We don't want anybody getting hurt. But I just, my heart, man, how I feel about this rivalry, from Cleveland's perspective, it's hard for me to see them blowing out anybody, especially with how much I'm thankful for this. There's 64,000 or something capacity at First Energy Stadium. And if you pack that place with 64,000 Cleveland fans with nervous energy about what could go wrong in this game. I think that has a big part of it. Now they can only put in 16,000. There's a little bit less, obviously, nervous aura in the energy of the stadium. I think that'll help. And it's weird to say that, but I do think it will help a little bit with calming Cleveland down, keeping everybody calm. And I think it's going to be a really important first quarter and a half game. Whoever's up in front early probably dictates how the rest of the game goes. Because if Cleveland falls behind again where it's, oh, crap, Pittsburgh hit a reverse pass, it's 13-3, 13-0, Cleveland can get into a little bit of a panic mode. So we'll see. But I do think Cleveland can get up early. I think Tomlin will say, okay, it's best that we kind of protect ourselves the rest of the way because this game doesn't matter all too much. It doesn't matter at all in the grand scheme of things because who knows what Buffalo's doing. You can't really predict what Buffalo's doing. You don't know if they're going after it. You don't know if they're not. So you just got to worry about your dudes and get into the next week. So I think 27-20, something like that, 10 points still feels high to me regardless of who's playing quarterback in the situation. Because I'll say this, Mason's not afraid. He's been there. He's been on that stage. He's been into Cleveland Stadium. He started there. So, listen, this should be a fascinating game all around. And hopefully everybody on both sides is just able to stay healthy.
Well, I'm curious because I'm trying to remember the scenario in my head for Cleveland to make it to the playoffs. I believe it does involve Indianapolis losing to Jacksonville, who has now firmly secured the number 1 pick. So there is at least something for Jacksonville to say we can legitimately play spoiler. So with that, do you believe that Cleveland makes it into the playoffs this year?
Yeah, I mean, they just have to beat Pittsburgh. They own the tiebreaker with the Colts. So if they win, they're in. It's pretty simple for Cleveland. They win, they're in, no matter what. If they lose, the Colts have to lose is one scenario where the Colts lose to Jacksonville, which is pretty far-fetched, even with Colts situations. That their tackles are a terrible situation at that position that's gotten even worse after last week. But, if they lose, they have to hope for that. Or if they lose, they have to hope for a Miami loss. And if there's another way in which the Titans could be eliminated as well. If the Titans lose and then the Dolphins and Ravens both end up winning, then that pushes the tiebreak to be with the Colts or with the Titans and the Browns, which the Browns would have. So there are plausible scenarios where if the Browns lose this game, they can still get in. They're not great scenarios at all, but there are ways in which if they lose, they can get in. But the simple way is they're treating this like a playoff game, man. We win, we advance, and we're in.
Well, there's one thing that you've mentioned in there, and by the way, Jag, for those who don't know, means just a guy, which yes, Cleveland is full of those guys, and again, teams got to have those guys, but also I think we'd be remiss to not remind people that Malcolm Smith was a Super Bowl MVP, the Seattle-Denver Super Bowl up in New York City. I mean, how confident are you? Because again, the playoffs are where legends are made. Just ask Hines Ward, ask early Antonio Brown to that rookie season Super Bowl. How confident are you for Cleveland making a surprise run if they make it to the playoffs?
Good question. I guess the nature by which they play, if they're healthy across the offensive line, and they're clicking a little bit, this Week 17 game will give us an indication. I think they can play with anybody because they have the ability to control the football, and Baker's playing good football. If they're pigeonholed and they fall behind early, and that can happen against any. Buffalo has a dynamic offense this year, as we all know. We know Pittsburgh can put it together now and again, and they feel like they're putting it together after the second half of last week. The Colts, probably the matchup they like the best. The Titans can score on anybody, as we know. Listen, the Browns have a style of football that if they're playing well and clicking offensively, they can beat people, and they feel like that's a situation they'd like to see if they can get into. So I would say I'm on a confidence scale of 1 to 10. If they get in, can they win a game or two? Like a 6. I feel like the 6-7. They could beat people. I'm not overly confident in it, but they have a style. They have enough skill. They can beat people. But they're learning, man. This is a franchise that has been so used to losing for so long. And you can say the players shuffle whatever, but when you shuffle players and you bring in young guys, they got to learn to win at the NFL level, and that's different. They don't have a ton of guys around them that have won at the NFL level, so they're all trying to collectively figure this thing out. And there is the aura of Cleveland, and they've never been there, and it's 17 years and a lot of pressure. They all feel it. Like they don't say it, but they all can feel it. And if they can get over the hump of, hey man, we finally made the playoffs, then anything could happen. We'll see. You'll see if the pressure loosens up and they just go play. So this game it has a lot of weird storylines, as we all know, a lot of things that you could say, well, of course that happened. Of course Pittsburgh comes back into Cleveland with Mason Rudolph after the situation last year, and they beat them with a majority of, like, there's a lot of that stuff that could happen. But we'll see if Cleveland's mature enough and capable enough to not let those same old Browns storylines happen and overcome the situation that is in their favor.
And Jay, what's the feeling been around Cleveland? The last time the Browns made the playoffs, they played the Steelers in that 2002 wild card game. And I know for myself, I was in third grade at the time, 18 years ago. I mean, it's pretty crazy to think just how long, Browns fans had to deal with, bad teams and just not making the playoffs. Like, I mean, this will be huge for the Browns to make the playoffs in their, since 2002.
Yeah, man. I mean, I was a seventh grader when they it's an unheard of thing for them. They obviously they had a decent team in 2007 that went 10-6, but blew a Week 16 game against the Bengals that they had no business losing. That they got kicked out because in Week 17 they needed the Colts to beat Tennessee, I think it was, and they didn't play Peyton Manning for more than a quarter, and the Titans won, so that kicked them out. 2014 they had an actual run. I think they were 7-4, and they were on top of the division after a Thursday night football game late in the year, and then they lost their next 5 games after that. So it's been few and far between, guys. It's unheard of. It's still a football city. They've lost a generation of fans. You can't lose for 25 years now, because I consider them still losing when they didn't have a team, and expect a majority of fans to stay around. They're in an interesting spot where I shouldn't say the word's not interesting. It's important. It's very important for them to start winning now. They're off to a great season. 10-5 is a great start. 11-5 would be a great and unheard of finish, especially considering they feel like they might have got the right coach and the right GM at the right time to have them overcome a lot of the issues that first-year coaches are dealing with and a chance to get in the playoffs. I will say this, to be what were they? They were 9-3. To be 9-3 and not make the playoffs would be extremely devastating. It would be, I don't want to say the start of what could be the downfall of, this is the negative sort of stuff, the pessimism that can happen, but to be where they're at and have a chance with, especially playing the Jets, 1-win Jets, Week 16, you win, you're in, and then the Steelers without Ben Roethlisberger, potentially some others, to have that Week 17 game and knock it in would be truly devastating for the franchise. Even going 10-6, you say, oh, okay, we did some things, they did well the first year. You never know when the schedule's going to work out. You never know when you're going to play the wrong teams at the right time. You just don't know. Nothing is guaranteed. So, yeah, I mean, after the Browns went 10-6 in 2007, it was like the sky's the limit. Where they went 4-12 the next year. Like, you just never know. And it's a rare opportunity for them. And although we feel good about it, we feel good that they have a good young nucleus and the right head coach and all of it, you never know. So it would be truly devastating for them to not make it this week. So they need to lay everything on the line. There's a nervous energy amongst Browns fans about it until the clock hits 0 and they win that football game. You're going to still see nervous Browns fans. So we're hoping they can do something they haven't done in a long time. And it'd be nice if our friends there in the border state in Pennsylvania would allow them to do that. That'd be really generous of them. So we'll look forward to that.
And Jake, this is just my last question. I just want to know: do you think Odell Beckham Jr. will be in Cleveland next year?
Tough to tell. It's a $1 million question, man. There's a lot on the line, money wise, in that wide receiver room. They play an offense that doesn't really need dominant wide receiver play. Look at San Francisco. Look at Minnesota. And they got rid of Diggs, and listen, it helps. Every team, it helps to have great wide receiver play, but they play the type of offense that doesn't need high-paid, great receivers. And they got to owe Jarvis Landry some real money, and they're going to owe Odell some real money, and there's going to be ways in which they can move off of either of those contracts if they want to. It's no secret Baker's played his best football this year without him and did not play well with him last year. I don't know. That's internal discussion stuff. I'd say it's 50-50, guys. They could move that player for a pick that they feel like maybe get a second or third round pick back, use it on a wide receiver in a deep wide receiver class and move on. Maybe Odell's better fit to play with somebody different, Deshaun Watson type guy, something like that. Somebody who stands in the pocket, holds it a little bit longer, gives him a chance to do some of those double move things. That's not necessarily who Baker is all the time. And that's not how this offense is predicated. So We'll see. That's a great question. That's not a dumb question by any stretch. A lot of people want to know the answer to that, and I think I can see certainly understandable, justifiable situations in which they move on without him. He's a great dude. He's a great guy. He gets a bad rap. I think he gets a bad rap about who he is as a person and a player. I think he's a good person who plays hard and puts his best foot forward. He's very emotional, but all these wide receivers are emotional, and a lot of dudes are emotional in different ways. And if they keep him, I'll be elated. I think he can find a way to make it work. But if they move on, I certainly understand that too. And I have no indication what way they're going to go with that. So I truly think it's a 50-50 up in the air. If the right situation presents itself, maybe they do. If not, maybe they feel like there's more to that relationship with Baker. There's more to be found there. There's more to be ironed out with the second year with Kevin Stefanski, and they want to see what's up with that. So and it also comes down to a guy's coming off an ACL, and he's going to come off an ACL, and maybe he starts the year playing, maybe he doesn't. And I don't know if anybody's going to find the right value in that too. So the right deal would have to come along too, guys. So we'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, I think it's truly 50-50.
Well, regardless, the Browns still, compared to 2007 and even compared to 2002, they're in a way better place right now, finally, with at least a guy that looks like he could be a franchise guy. And that's Jake Burns, film analyst and writer at the Orange and Brown Report. Jake, thanks again for coming on the show.
My pleasure, guys. Anytime.
All right, and that's Jake Burns, film analyst and writer for the Orange and Brown Report. Be sure to follow him on Twitter and also check out his podcast, as he had me on to talk a little bit about this matchup and potentially the future for the Steelers. Real interesting stuff. And Chris, it's time to do our final predictions for the Steelers' regular season finale, and with all the names sitting out in preparation for the playoffs, it's going to be a hard prediction for us. I said on Jake's podcast that the Browns would be winning 27-21.
Yeah, it seems right. I mean, I can't imagine if the Browns would lose this game, that would be just like an epic failure, for them. A playoff spot's on the line, and the Steelers are going to rest, numerous players. And especially Mason Rudolph at quarterback. I mean, you think the Browns would take advantage of that.
I mean, it's not to say that we don't have confidence that Mason can do some good things out there. He has had a couple nice moments last year, as shown on the Twitter page. So, but it's just that you're not confident in there, and after all, this is a game that really has zero implications for the Steelers. If the Bills lose, they move up to the number 2 seed. Then the Steelers stay in the number 3 seed. So regardless, it's just one of those games that you're glad to have them. It's good to already know that you're in the playoffs and you don't have to worry.
Yeah, it's good to have a relaxing week 17, especially after the last 2 seasons. Remember that time, 2018, they were looking up on the Jumbotron hoping that the Browns would beat the Ravens.
Playoff format, there's now 7 teams in each conference going to the playoffs, but I'd be remiss to not mention that the last 2 years the Steelers would have made it as the 7th team in each playoff format.
Oh yeah, a lot of people think that the new playoff format hurts the 2 seed because they usually would have that bye, and you're seeing a lot of teams this week, not playing their stars, like the Steelers are one of them, and Buffalo too. I mean, I don't think they're having their starters play.
Kansas City seems a little bit weak with how much trouble they had against Atlanta, but Atlanta is a good football team that can't finish, and everyone has a weakness. So as far as I'm concerned, these playoffs in the AFC have never been more wide open, in my opinion. I could literally say that the Steelers could run the table and win it all.
Yeah, the Chiefs, they're 15-1, but look, a lot of their wins have come close, and they're not like blowing out bad teams either. Like you mentioned, the Falcons, like their record-wise, but yeah. So the Chiefs, their offense is dynamic, obviously with Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, but I think they can be beat though.
I think it's just a lot of people remembering from Patrick Mahomes just going into absolute God mode last year, and that's what makes people, they give the Chiefs the benefit of the doubt because they are the defending champions, but anyone could be beaten on any given Sunday or Saturday in some cases in the first 2 weeks. So again, exciting times ahead for the Steelers. It's always an honor to have a chance to at least say that you're in contention for the Super Bowl in January. Steelers versus Browns, 1 p.m. CBS. The Steelers are in the playoffs, so they're resting their starters, so we get to enjoy ourselves a little bit for once and have a little fun, see if some guys can, maybe play their way onto rosters next year. There's a ton of guys out there that I think we should definitely be taking a look at. Everyone's saying Mason Rudolph, but I'm also going to say on the defense, the Steelers reacquired Sean Davis, and I imagine that he's probably going to be playing at some point during this game. And, of course, there's guys like Jordan Dangerfield, and depending on what they do with the corners, Antoine Brooks and Justin Lane. There's a lot of guys that we're going to be seeing the future of the Steelers, especially with all the cap issues this offseason.
Yeah, it's going to be good to see some of those backup players, like you mentioned, Sean Davis. I hope they pull out Micah fast because, a lot of these guys that, main starters, you just want to have them healthy for the playoffs. And they might play the Browns next week. They have the best odds or the most scenarios is that Steelers will play the Browns next week in the playoffs also. The Ravens are another team that have a lot of scenarios that they will play Pittsburgh. What was your score for the game?
My score was 27-21 Browns.
Okay, I'll go with the Browns. I'll say 23-13.
How do you think the Steelers score? I say 2 defensive touchdowns.
I have 13 points. I'll say they get a touchdown and 2 field goals.
That's all for us here on the podcast. For Chris Ward, I'm Ty Polk. Thank you for tuning in to the Renegade Blitz, and we'll see you in the playoffs. Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. Our podcast is available on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeart, and Spotify.